They said the Duke of Ashford never wept, that his composure was as immovable as the marble pillars supporting his ancestral estate, that grief itself had learned not to touch him. So when Eira, the unremarkable maid tasked with reshelving forgotten books after midnight, pushed open the library door and found him collapsed in a leather chair with his face buried in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs, she knew instinctively that what happened next would alter both their lives in ways neither could predict. And what she said in that moment, when anyone else would have fled or pretended not to see, would become the single reason he would later kneel before her and offer everything he possessed. But that night was still 3 weeks away. The moment itself began far more quietly, in the way all impossible things do, with a door that shouldn't have been opened and a truth that shouldn't have been witnessed. Eira had been at Ashford House for 7 months. 7 months of early mornings and late nights, of polishing banisters that gleamed like glass, of moving through corridors so silently that even the portraits seemed not to notice her. She was 26, though most assumed younger due to her small frame and the way she kept her dark hair pinned severely back. She spoke when necessary, smiled when appropriate, and had perfected the art of being present without being seen. The library had become her favorite assignment precisely because no one else wanted it. 3 stories of books, many untouched for decades, cataloged in a system only the previous librarian had understood before his death 2 years prior. The current Duke rarely entered. The previous Duke, his father, had been a scholar. This one was something else entirely. Duke Cassian Ashford was 29 and had inherited the title 18 months ago under circumstances the household still whispered about. His father's sudden death, his younger brother's subsequent disappearance to the continent, the weight of an estate drowning in debts no one had known existed until the will was read. He was tall, severe in appearance, with dark eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they touched. He spoke little, smiled never, and moved through his own home like a general inspecting occupied territory. The staff feared disappointing him not because he was cruel, but because his silence somehow felt worse than anger. Eira had been dusting the 3rd floor reading alcove when she'd heard it. A sound so unexpected in that vast, silent house that at first she thought she'd imagined it. A sharp intake of breath. Uneven. Raw. She should have left immediately. Protocol demanded it. Whatever was happening beyond that partially open door was not meant for servants to witness. But the sound came again, and something in its brokenness made her pause. She moved quietly to the doorway, intending only to ensure no one was injured, and stopped. The Duke sat in the massive leather chair near the fireplace, though no fire burned. Moonlight fell through the tall windows, illuminating him in pale silver. His jacket was discarded, his cravat hung loose, and his face, always so carefully controlled, was buried in his hands as his entire body shook with the kind of grief that comes when you've held it back too long. On the desk beside him lay an open letter. Even from the doorway, Eira could see the official seal, the heavy paper, the few lines of text that had clearly delivered something devastating. For several seconds, she stood frozen, caught between retreat and something she couldn't name. Then, quietly, she stepped inside. "Your Grace." The Duke's head snapped up instantly. His expression shifted from raw anguish to shock to something close to fury in the span of a heartbeat. He stood so quickly the chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Get out." His voice was rough, barely controlled. Eira didn't move. The door was open. "I don't care. Leave. Now." Anyone else would have fled. Every instinct of self-preservation screamed at her to obey. But something in I stopped her. Not anger. Terror. The terror of being seen when you've spent your entire life building walls. "You're allowed to grieve," she said quietly. The words hung in the air between them. For a moment, she thought he might actually shout, might summon guards, might have her dismissed on the spot. Instead, something in his expression cracked further. "You know nothing about what I'm allowed," he said, but the fury had drained from his voice, leaving only exhaustion. Eira took one careful step forward. "I know you're alone in a house full of people. I know you haven't slept properly in weeks. And I know that whatever that letter says, carrying it by yourself won't make it lighter." The Duke stared at her as though she'd spoken a language he'd forgotten existed. His jaw worked silently. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, "My brother is dead." The words fell like stones into deep water. Ira's breath caught. The household had whispered about the younger Ashford son, the one who'd left for the continent after a bitter argument with his father, the one the Duke had been trying to find for months. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it with every part of herself. "Sorry." The Duke laughed, a broken sound. "Everyone is sorry. No one understands." "Then help me understand." And perhaps it was the hour, or the exhaustion, or the fact that she was the first person who hadn't looked away. But the Duke of Ashford began to speak. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking after years of pressure. Cassian told her things he'd told no one. How his father had demanded perfection from both sons, but only found it in the younger. How Cassian had spent his childhood being compared to a brother 4 years his junior, and always found wanting. How when their father died and the debts were discovered, it was Cassian who stayed to face them while his brother fled, shouting that he refused to be buried alive in duty the way Cassian had been. "I told him he was selfish," Cassian said, his voice hollow. "Told him to run if he couldn't handle responsibility. Those were the last words I ever said to him. And now he's drowned in some Italian harbor, and I'll never—" His voice broke completely. Eira had moved closer without realizing it. She stood now just a few feet away, close enough to see the exhaustion carved into his features, the weight he'd been carrying alone since the day he'd inherited a title he'd never wanted. "You were drowning too," she said quietly. "You both were. The difference is you didn't know how to ask for help." Cassian looked at her sharply. "I didn't need help. I needed him to." He stopped, jaw clenched. "It doesn't matter now. It matters because you're still carrying it. All of it. His choice, your father's expectations, the debts, the estate, everything. And you think if you show weakness for even a moment, it'll all come crashing down. Won't it?" The question was almost a challenge. "No," Eira said simply. "It'll make you human." The silence that followed was different from before. Cassian stared at her as though truly seeing her for the first time. Not as a servant, not as an intrusion, but as someone who had somehow looked past every wall he'd built and spoken directly to the person he'd hidden behind them. "Why are you still here?" he asked finally. "Why haven't you run?" "Because everyone else does," Eira said. "And I think you're tired of people running." Something shifted in his expression. The rigid control he wore like armor loosened, just slightly, just enough to reveal the exhaustion beneath. He sank back into the chair, suddenly looking years older. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Any of this. The estate is hemorrhaging money. The tenants are suffering. I've sold everything I can sell, cut every expense, worked every hour, and it's still not enough. And now my brother is dead, and I can't even." He pressed his palms against his eyes. "I can't even bring his body home. There's no money for it." Ira's heart contracted painfully. She knelt slowly, bringing herself to his eye level, though protocol screamed against it. "Then we find another way." "We?" The word came out skeptical, almost bitter. "The household knows the estate is struggling," Eira said. "Most of us have stayed because we believe in Ashford House and what it represents. If you asked for help instead of hiding the burden, you might be surprised." "I can't ask servants to." "We're not just servants," Eira interrupted gently. "We're people who live here, who care about this place, about you, whether you see it or not." Cassian's hands lowered slowly. He looked at her kneeling before him, this quiet maid who had somehow walked into his darkest moment and refused to look away. And something inside him recognized what he'd been missing all along. Not strength. Connection. "I don't even know your name," he said quietly. "Eira Moss." "Eira." He said it carefully, as though testing how it felt. "You should hate me. I've barely acknowledged your existence in 7 months." "You've barely acknowledged anyone's existence," she pointed out, "including your own." A ghost of something that might have been a smile crossed his face. "You're remarkably bold for someone who could be dismissed for speaking to me this way." "Then dismiss me," Eira said. "But I think you won't. Because right now, I'm the only person in this house treating you like a person instead of a title." The almost smile faded, replaced by something more vulnerable. "I don't know how to be both." "Then start with one," Eira said. "Be a person tonight. Be a brother who's grieving." "The Duke can wait until morning." For a long moment, Cassian said nothing. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "Stay. Your Grace." "Cassian," he corrected. "If we're dispensing with titles tonight, use my name." Eira's breath caught. The request was intimate in a way that transcended rank, a trust offered that felt more significant than any formal gesture. "Stay," he repeated. "Please." "I don't." He stopped, swallowed hard. "I don't want to be alone." So she stayed. She sat in the chair across from him, and as the moon tracked slowly across the sky, Cassian talked. About his brother, about their childhood, about the weight of expectations that had crushed them both in different ways. And Eira listened, offering neither platitudes nor solutions, just presence. Somewhere near dawn, Cassian finally fell silent, exhausted but lighter somehow, as though sharing the burden had made it bearable. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not running, for seeing." He gestured vaguely at himself. "The person," Eira finished gently. "Yes." She stood to leave, knowing the household would wake soon. But at the door, she paused. "Cassian," he looked up, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. "You're stronger than you think. But you don't have to be strong alone." She left before he could respond. But as she slipped through the silent corridors back to the servants' quarters, she didn't see the way the Duke of Ashford sat motionless in that library chair, staring at the door she'd disappeared through, realizing that something fundamental had just changed in a way he couldn't undo. The next 3 weeks transformed Ashford House in ways both visible and invisible. Cassian began emerging from his study. He spoke to the staff not as invisible hands, but as people. He accepted help organizing the finances, and when Eira quietly mentioned that several tenants had skills in bookkeeping and would likely assist if asked, he swallowed his pride and asked. The estate began to breathe again, slowly, incrementally, but noticeably. And through it all, Cassian found himself seeking Eira's presence in ways that had nothing to do with household duties. A question about library organization became a conversation about literature. A chance meeting in the garden turned into a discussion about estate history. He learned she was fluent in 3 languages, self-taught through the very books she shelved. That her observations about people were unerringly accurate. That her quiet competence masked a sharp mind most had never bothered to notice. He also learned that her presence had become essential in ways that terrified him. The household noticed. Whispers began, carefully concealed from the Duke, but obvious to Eira. She felt the weight of stares, heard the silences that fell when she entered rooms. She knew what they were thinking, what they feared, that she was overstepping, that the Duke's attention was dangerous for someone of her station. She began pulling back, taking assignments that kept her away from the main house. Cassian noticed immediately, and the absence felt like losing light. He found her finally in the third-floor library alcove where this had all begun, reshelving volumes in the fading afternoon sun. "You've been avoiding me," he said without preamble. Eira didn't turn. "I've been working, Your Grace." The formal address stung more than he'd expected. "Eira, this isn't appropriate," she said quietly, still facing the shelves. "People are talking. I won't be the reason your reputation suffers." "My reputation?" Cassian moved closer. "Eira, look at me." She turned slowly, and he saw the resignation in her eyes. The preparation for goodbye. "I don't care what people say," he continued. "I care that you're here. That you see me, truly see me, in ways no one else has bothered to try. Do you understand what that means to me?" "It doesn't matter what it means," Eira said, though her voice wavered. "I'm a maid. You're a duke. Whatever this is, it can't. What if I want it to?" The words escaped before he could stop them. Eira stared at him, eyes widening. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Cassian took another step forward. "That night in the library, you told me I didn't have to be strong alone. You've proven that every day since. You've helped me save this estate, save myself, and I." He stopped, swallowed hard. "I don't want to do any of this without you." "Cassian, I'm in love with you," he said, the words simple and devastating. "I think I have been since the moment you refused to run when anyone else would have." Eira's breath caught. Tears filled her eyes. "The world won't allow this. Your peers, society, they'll let them," Cassian said fiercely. "I've spent my entire life doing what others expected, following rules that protected status over happiness. And where did it lead? To loneliness. To watching my brother die estranged because neither of us knew how to choose connection over duty." He moved closer still. "You taught me that being human isn't weakness. Now let me prove I learned the lesson." "How?" The word came out broken, hopeful and terrified at once. Cassian did something, then, that would become legend among those who witnessed it. He knelt. Not in mockery, not as performance, but with absolute sincerity, a duke lowering himself before a maid in the dusty silence of a forgotten library. "Marry me," he said quietly, "not because of duty or expectation or anything the world thinks I should want, but because you make me believe that a life built on genuine connection is worth more than 100 estates. Because you see the person behind the title, and that's the rarest gift I've ever received." Eira trembled, tears spilling freely now. "They'll say I trapped you, that I'm unsuitable. They'll say many things," Cassian agreed. "But here's what matters. I'm asking. You're choosing. Everything else is just noise." He held her gaze steadily. "So choose, Eira. Choose yourself. Choose us. Choose the life we could build together, where strength comes from partnership and grief is shared, and no one has to be alone." The silence stretched, fragile as glass. Then Eira knelt too, bringing them level, and took his hands in hers. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." The kiss that followed was gentle, tentative, perfect. And when they finally pulled apart, Cassian rested his forehead against hers. "The world will be difficult," he murmured. "Then we'll face it together," Eira said. "The way we faced everything else." 6 months later, when Eira Moss became the Duchess of Ashford in a ceremony attended by a household that had learned to value substance over status, the whispers had already begun to change. Because the estate was thriving now, built on collaboration rather than isolation. Because the Duke who had once been unreachable now knew his tenants by name. And because everyone who witnessed them together saw something society often forgot. That true nobility came not from birth, but from the courage to choose love over expectation. Years later, when their children asked how their parents met, Cassian would smile and say their mother had found him in a library when he was lost. And Eira would add, quietly, that sometimes the bravest thing anyone could do was stay when the world expected them to run. And in the library where it all began, a single book remained always on the desk. A volume of poetry Eira had once quoted that terrible, beautiful night. "We are stronger in the places we've been broken." Beneath it, in Cassian's hand, a single line, "and strongest when we allow others to see those places." The Duke and Duchess of Ashford had built an entire life on that truth. And it had made all the difference.